Greetings, everyone. My name is Angela Gurko, and I will be the moderator for tonight's League of Women Voters Candidate Forum, featuring the candidates for the position of Senator for Washington's 24th Legislative District. Voting is the cornerstone of our democracy, and I appreciate the time you're taking to listen tonight, either here on Zoom, via your phone, or via our media partner, KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend's Community Radio. For those of you on the radio who would like to join us via the Zoom links, those can be found on the website for the League of Women Voters Jefferson County, the League of Women Voters Clallam County, or via the links of our tech partner, the North Olympic Library System. And for those of you on the Zoom link, should you start to have technical difficulties with Zoom, you can listen via KPTZ at 91.9 FM or via their website, kptz.org, or you can use one of the phone numbers on the Zoom link to call in and listen to on the phone. For those of you interested in closed captioning, you'll see a button or box at the lower part of your Zoom screen with the letters CC on it. It may be behind three little dots that say more, but that CC is where you can click to see the captions that Zoom generates live. Over the past month, we've received more than 57 thoughtful questions from the community, questions they wanted the candidates to answer. So the questions you hear tonight are your questions, and we thank everyone who took the time to submit questions for this forum. The questions submitted were first checked against the job responsibilities to make sure we're asking questions that relate directly to the job. In many cases, multiple people submitted similar questions, and we did our best to combine questions in a way that allow us to cover as many questions as possible on a wide range of topics. We will try to get through as many questions as possible in the time we have this evening. And for those of you in the audience who really wanted their question answered, be sure to tune in next Thursday, July 18th at 5:30 p.m. for our final forum featuring the candidates for the 24th Legislative District Position 2, as your question might be asked then. Before we began this forum, we made sure that all the candidates were able to see our 2-minute timer, and now we'll put that to use. Tonight, we have 2 of the 3 candidates running to represent us in the Senate in Olympia. Candidate James Russell declined to participate in the forum, so tonight we have candidate Marcia Kelbaum and candidate Mike Chapman. Each candidate will give a 2-minute opening statement in the order that they will appear on the ballot. After that, we will move to the question portion, and at the end of the forum, each candidate will give a 2-minute closing statement. With candidate Russell not attending, he will appear first on the ballot. Candidate Chapman, you will go first with your opening statement.
Well, thank you very much, and thanks to the League for sponsoring this important debate, and thanks for everyone for tuning in, and for all those questions that came in. That's that's our democracy in action, and that's a lot of what this election is going to be about. Our democracy is going to be on the line this fall. And I think here in Washington, we've had a really strong record of defending our democracy, of defending the right to vote, defending women's rights, defending our neighbors who may be in the LGBTQ community, defending their rights. We're going to hear a lot of concerns tonight, and certainly I share many of those same concerns, and I've heard them as well. But I would like to also remind everybody, Washington, and especially the 24th Legislative District, is an amazingly special place. And it's not all doom and gloom out here. We have an amazing array of public servants, from our school teachers to our first responders, to our mental health counselors, to the men and women in law enforcement, to our public service workers and our PUD workers, the people that keep our roads clear in the winter, and the construction workers that are rebuilding our roads and bridges. That's part of being out here on the kind of the end of the world, right? The district stretches from the Hood Canal Bridge all the way to Nia Bay, to the most northwestern point of the continental United States, down to ocean shores and parts of most of Grays Harbor. We work together, and we have an amazing cadre of public servants who do a great job every day. And so as we discuss the issues and the concerns, please don't forget that there are men and women working hard, much harder than we ever can do in Olympia, delivering these services every day. And then finally, gosh, if there's nothing else, 8 years in the House, 16 years as a county commissioner, and 10 years as a law enforcement career. I may be getting old, but I'm proud of the fact that this is my 34th year in public service, and I look forward to everyone's questions tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we will hear the opening statement from candidate Kelbon.
Hi, thank you. I'm Marcia Kelbon. I live in Quilcene. I've been in this area for 43 years. It's been very good to me. I have a background as an engineer, a patent attorney, and a former business executive. I worked during my career for the Navy for 4 years as a civilian. I worked for the Attorney General's office in Snohomish County doing child abuse and neglect cases. I worked as a patent attorney helping companies, large and small, protect their innovations and helping companies start. I joined one of those companies, a startup, as their general counsel and number two executive, and grew it up over 19 years to create over 250 jobs. I raised three children here. They went through the public schools, which did a great job with them. Two of them live here now, two of my adult children and a very dear granddaughter. And it is for them and other people in their generations that spurred me to run. I am concerned that all the opportunities I add here locally are not going to be present for those generations. We are well on the way to becoming a peninsula full of well-to-do retirees and tourists, and a lot in the middle. I know many retirees on fixed income that are holding on by the skin of their teeth, and many young people that are not able to start building a meaningful life with security here. So we need to address our cost of living. We need to provide some real living wage jobs. I also want to more effectively and compassionately address our homeless situation so that we can help people out of that cycle and keep us safe and pay attention to our educational system. I'll be painted tonight as the evil Republican, but I can tell you that women and LGBT have an ally in me. You'll probably hear more about that tonight. I'm a centrist. I don't do the crazy stuff. I care about here at the state. And I just really want to make it so that we can be a thriving multi-generational community. I'm thankful for the League for hosting this and for all those who are interested enough to attend and send in questions. Thank you. It is important, and I'm glad to see that you care. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Let's get right to the questions. Housing. High mortgage rates and rent are driving individuals and families out of their preferred communities and into substandard housing or homelessness. What will you do as an elected official to alleviate the Olympic Peninsula's shortage of affordable, low-income, and workforce housing, and how will you pay for it? Candidate Kelbon, you will be answering that question first.
Great. Thank you. So housing is a critical issue for everyone here. We hear that over and over again. I've stopped at over 5,000 doors. By the way, your timer hasn't restarted, so I'll just note that to keep us all honest here. And I hear this over and over again. We need to do a number of things. We need to revise our Growth Management Act so that we have smaller, more affordable lots to build upon. We need to right-size our regulations so we don't put things in that are so tight that might make sense in a dense urban environment, but that don't make sense in a rural environment. We need to repeal or revise the new energy code. We already have very tight homes, but we have something now that has added $30,000 in costs to a build without a commensurate gain, and that requires you to spray foam into your walls. And I don't want to live in plastic foam. I don't want to require other people to do so as well. We need to let people subdivide and build multifamily housing. We have an extreme need for multifamily housing. So there's a lot of steps we can do there. We also need to work on our education so that we have people coming out of the skilled trades that can both earn a good living and that can also provide the skilled labor, the electricians, the plumbers, the carpenters, the welders, and things that we need for that building. And we need to provide, again, those living wage jobs so people can afford to live here. Because our risk is that we become somewhere like Southern California or some well-to-do suburbs of Seattle, which have an incredibly high housing price, but they have this very robust economic base to go with it. And if we have one without the other, we are truly lost. So that's the goal. How we pay for that, again, is to spur business. Everyone is more productive and is more economically sound if we do that. I have no idea where I'm at time-wise.
You're at 125.
Okay,
I'll do this when it's
perfect.
time up.
Good. Okay, I don't want to abuse the system. I'm a rule follower. I follow the rule of law from top to bottom. So we have a lot of work to do with people that are very compassionate and focused on doing that. I'm not all about government subsidized housing. There is a place for that for people that are vulnerable. Certainly elderly and the infirm need that. What I really want to get is people into home ownership so they can build a robust life, build equity, and be secure in their retirement. And for that, we need starter homes. We need, I think that was 10 seconds. I'm not sure.
That was, yep, that was,
There was
time's
that.
up.
Was it. Okay, I'm going to stop babbling. Thank you. We'll figure out the timing system.
all right, candidate Chapman.
Thank you. Look, if this was just a North Olympic Peninsula problem, I'd be willing to take full responsibility. If this was just a Washington problem, I'd be saying, we probably have failed in Olympia. But I just happened to read an article today that listed states like Montana, Idaho, Utah, Arizona, facing the same issue across the board, housing affordability. For some whatever reason, after the Great Recession, if people remember back, and I was governing at the county at that time, we lost a lot of home builders during that period of time. A lot of home builders went bankrupt during the Great Recession when housing prices around the country collapsed. And since that, we've been underbuilding houses across this nation. And so this isn't just an Olympic Peninsula issue. It's not a Washington issue. But what Washington has done is take a lead. We had the largest investment in the Housing Trust Fund this year through our supplemental budget of an additional $127.5 million, which is building affordable and low-income housing for people in need, including in Port Townsend, where there was a wonderful project built. Representative Theringer and Senator Vandeweghe and I have been a team in Olympia to make sure that our builders have the tools and that we didn't put erroneous regulations on. I don't know where my opponent understands about foam and walls. I don't know where she got that, but I do know this. Many people criticize the energy code and say that's going to add all this cost to the upfront cost on a house. But it saves you on the back end over the long run of home ownership. You're going to save money. And those are national codes that we're required, that is set by the Building Code Council in Olympia, which is made up of people from the industry themselves. They put the codes in place as it comes from the national standards. And so that the folks that make the products have a standard nationwide. We can't have reduced codes here on the peninsula. They've got standards that they've got to meet. That was a quick 2 minutes. I'm going to take 8 extra seconds and I'll take it off. We talk about these kinds of issues in 2 minutes. Folks, we've spent hundreds of hours debating and discussing issues around housing alone in the last 2 legislative sessions where it's been the number one issue. It's really difficult to kind of come up with coherent answers in 2 minutes.
Okay, we're going to take a second here, get our timer back in. Hopefully we will be ready to go. Our next question is on infrastructure. We'll have a few questions on infrastructure. Candidate Chapman, you'll answer this one first. What would you like the infrastructure of the 24th LD to be in 10 years regarding water, roads, and broadband? And what will you do to put this in action?
Well, the first thing that I would do is make sure that we continue to convince Representative Theringer to serve for another 10 years as the chair of the capital budget. Because, folks, we've never had the chair of the capital budget from the 24th, and we probably never will. And I think everybody needs to take a step back and look at the investments that we've made out of the capital budget and out of the transportation budget where Senator Vandeweghe and I serve. A brand new Elwha River Bridge is being built almost to the point of completion, $32 million. It was the very first budget proviso that I submitted in my first year in the House. Last session, in a short session, and thanks to Chairman Jake Fye, who's a Port Angeles graduate who chairs the House Transportation Committee, we were able, and I was able to secure another $30+ million project to improve the Sequim to Blinn corridor project. You're seeing construction projects up and down the peninsula. Our roads, our bridges, our fish passage barrier projects are being changed, and that's part of the infrastructure and part of our resiliency. The old culverts, as climate change occurs more and more, and we have higher rain events, those old culverts could plug and then blow out the road with the high rain events. We are now building resilient fish passage, allowing for the fish so that our salmon can come back, but also so that our roads aren't taken out with the big floods that we're going to continue to see and the high rain events that we're going to continue to see with the effects of climate change. In 30 seconds, I'll talk about the $25 million that went to the Quinault tribe for their forest legacy to take back forest lands that they once owned once again. $15 million for the Jamestown Sklallam Behavioral Health Center. Glad to see that project up and running and serving people. $5 million for small school construction account. How about we put in 3 million for the Boathaven Stormwater Project on the Port Angeles waterfront? I mean, I could go on and on and on. We have made millions of dollars of investments, and we haven't touched on broadband. And hopefully, when you guys have Steve on next week, we actually set up an entire broadband department and funded it with an amazing amount of money. Those are your tax dollars going to work here on the 24th.
Thank you. And now candidate Kelbon.
Okay, can I take a little altitude with the timer here? Because it seems like we're doing that. But infrastructure wise, we have work to do. We have work that's going well. We're getting a lot of fiber broadband installed now, and there's a lot of federal funding going for that. Look, I'm not a huge tax person, but if there is funding there from state or federal, I'm going to dive in and fight everything I can to get that to come here to this district still. But I don't want to just survive on grants. We should have an economy that doesn't require grants to make us go. So I'll throw that at the outset. With respect to infrastructure, we have work to do on our pipelines that are supplying Port Townsend from Lord's Lake, which is just up the hill from me. In fact, I have the last piece of personal property next to Lord's Lake. I know that dam is failing. The pipeline needs work. The pipeline that supplies Port Angeles also needs work. So those are things that the state should help with. I believe infrastructure is a state job. Our highways, we're making headway on, but boy, there's more we need to do. I personally, I'm happy with the two-lane rural road. I'd like to see overpasses and underpasses rather than roundabouts on our major highways. That slows it down. They're fine in the side roads, but on the major highways, I think we deserve those. How do we pay for that? Right now, we're putting a lot of funding into fish culverts, some of which are effective, and it's going to bring back salmon, some which are only being done for the letter of the law under this injunction. And as an attorney, I say, why don't we get the parties to that injunction together and figure out another solution? Meet with the tribes, that original parties, and say, look, instead of spending this 300 million on these culverts that are doing nothing because the upstream habitat is so occluded, why don't we split those funds in some fashion? The tribes can take that for mitigation of salmon with their share. Our share can go back into doing highway work that needs to be done, bridges that need to be attended to. We have many bridges that are not fit, and we have a ferry system that needs a lot of help. It used to be so reliable. I used it daily for decades, and now I just always drive around because I know that's going to be a safer go. So progress, but more work to do. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, continuing a little bit on infrastructure and water, more specifically on local water infrastructure needs, can you please explain your thoughts on the Sequim off-channel reservoir, particularly regarding need, risk to the community, and cost? And this would be candidate Kelbon. This is you first.
Great, thank you. Yeah, I support that. We have opened up flows. We already had it open on the Dungeness. We've opened it up on the Elwha, and that's great for fish, but it does create a problem in that in the summer water runs too low, and that is the lifeblood of the community. We need to bring all the people that have rights in. Riparian rights go back historically. I'm very aware of how that goes from law school a few decades ago, but we have agricultural needs, we have growing residential needs, we have travel needs, we have fish needs. That all needs to be balanced. All these people need to come to the table, and having a reservoir that supplies a consistent water source during the dry months, I think, is going to be a boon. Frankly, I'd love to explore something like that on the Elwha. Now that we no longer have a dam, is there some way to capture some of that water in a catchment that could give us a stable supply in the summer months? So yeah, everyone has to be involved in how that works out, who gets access to it and how, but it is critical that we do it. And particularly if you look at the growth that's going on in Sequim right now, which is really a desert. And if you look at the planned projects, down by the John Wayne Marina and the other end of town up by Carlsberg, boy, there's going to be a lot more people needing water. So it's best to get this ironed out ahead of time and figure out how to address all of those needs. And without a reliable summer source, I don't know how that would happen. So we should address that. As I mentioned earlier, we have leaking pipelines. That was one of the problems with the mill, that McKinley mill that was just closed or at least shuttered temporarily, we can hope, in Port Angeles, was they had a pipeline that is leaking that needs a lot of investment. Again, I think infrastructure is an appropriate place for the state to spend. It is one of the priorities that should be at the top of the list.
Thank you, candidate Kelburn. And now candidate Chapman, the Sequim off-channel reservoir.
Yeah, again, under the leadership of Representative Theringer chairing the capital budget, we've made a significant investment in that project. All three of us representing this area certainly support that project. Look, when we talk about water, I think there's, I think we've kind of, look, we support that project. It's being built. But talk about the Elwha River. And talk about the city of Port Angeles, who made a very legitimate request to the Department of Natural Resources saying, hey, let's not log along the Elwha River and impact the watershed that supplies the water to the major city on the North Olympic Peninsula. And I've received more criticism for my support of stopping that logging to protect the Elwha watershed. And here, I'll put this on the record. I'm willing to lose my job, lose this race over that decision, because in 50 years and 100 years, I don't want people looking back and saying they logged right up to the Elwha River, devastated the city's supply of clean water. And what were they thinking? Much like we look back now and say, what were they thinking when certain environmental decisions were made? So when you talk about water, we've got to look across the entire district. Yeah, we live, we have the rainforest and we have the desert in Sequim, but water is the lifeblood of this district. And I think this whole debate over cutting trees right up to the Elwha River, when that is the supply to our mill, to our city, to our economic growth, and it's easy for people who don't live, for those of us who live in the city of Port Angeles, the last 2 summers, we've had significant water restrictions because of the changing climate that we're seeing in the Olympic Mountains, the receding glaciers, and we're going to have even more restrictive water restrictions, I suspect, this year. It's easy for people who don't live here in the city of Port Angeles, who may live on 200 acres and have a Shangri-La in their own well, to criticize a city making that decision and those of us who live here. But you know what? We're in this together. And the city of Port Angeles did the right thing by asking the Department of Natural Resources, let's not clear cut right up to the edge of the Elwha River for future generations.
Well, continuing on that same theme, the forests in the 24th Legislative District are removing large amounts of CO2 from our atmosphere. What specific forestry practices do you support to protect our forests, including incentives for small landowners, fire suppression practices, fire management practices, and changes in clear-cut logging? Candidate Chapman.
So as having the opportunity to have chaired the House Ag and Natural Resource Committee for the last 4 years, these are issues that we've worked really, really close on. Number one, we passed a widely bipartisan bill to set up a wildfire fund so that DNR has the tools and the budget to attack wildfires when they do start. Look, people move to the Olympic Peninsula for a lot of reasons, but I guarantee you one reason they didn't move here was to look at clear-cut forests as far as the eye can see. I believe that we have done a great job of managing our forests for revenue and the protection of the environment, and we can continue to do a good job. In my committee, we looked at the issues of carbon sequestration, and it's a legitimate science that trees pull carbon out of the atmosphere. That is settled science, and we know that carbon is, impacting our climate in very negative ways. We are a carbon sink. We are a net sequester of carbon on the North Olympic Peninsula compared to the carbon that we generate. And we can be very proud of that. And I think a lot of people live here understanding that we are sequestering more carbon into our natural environment, into our forests, than we're emitting. And I think that's something to be celebrated. It's what makes the Olympic Peninsula so special. Yes, we still harvest, and there are needs, and the money goes into our school construction account. The sad part, folks, is most of the revenue from our school construction account goes to build schools in the I-5 corridor because we're having a hard time passing bonds. So Representative Theringer and his leadership, they're looking at a way to change the impacts of the school construction account, to lower those bond levels so that the trees, when we cut them here, stay in our account, help to build our schools. I don't think people are too thrilled when they hear that our trees being cut are building schools in Issaquah. But we also have to continue to set aside the necessary protections and buffers for the environment, for carbon sequestration, and such as that, we should be able to sell carbon credits on public lands to protect the environment and to set aside carbon sequestration projects.
And Candidate Kelbon, your response on forestry practices.
Sure. This is an issue that's kind of near and dear to my heart as a fire commissioner down here in Quilcene, where we historically have relied on about $250,000 a year on average of timber revenue from DNR. And it is the lifeblood for fire districts. It is the lifeblood for schools, hospital districts, libraries, cemeteries, you name it, all the junior taxing districts throughout the peninsula. And I'm all about balance, and that includes with timber. I don't want to cut a stick of old growth. I don't want to cut mature forests, second growth, but things that are in rotation, I think should stay in rotation with, of course, all the appropriate buffers around streams and waterways and steep slopes and endangered habitat for species that are in decline. All of that needs to be addressed. But there is still a place, I believe, for working forest on the peninsula. And frankly, we don't have a lot of industry besides that. So until that's replaced, it is important for jobs and it is important for funding those school districts. So things that are in rotation, that are not in the sensitive areas, should stay in rotation. And the alternative is we don't do it. And then we have a fire risk. Last year, we had a wildfire about a mile away from my house on Penny Creek Road, which luckily we were able to stop by dipping water out of Lord's Lake. Sorry, Port Townsend, but that's what the NR did, and I'm glad it was there. You have to manage some of those stands, particularly those that have been in rotation. They're very dense, and they need to be thinned at a minimum, which does provide timber, and also it provides jobs. And frankly, if you also look at another environmental issue we have besides carbon, which I agreed we need to address, that is plastics. We have microplastics, which is a huge and growing problem. And when I was a kid, you bought things that were in glass, cardboard, paper, wax paper. A lot of those, except for the glass, come from trees. I think there are some good resources here we can draw on locally. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Turning a little bit more toward the politics of climate change, supporters of the state's Climate Commitment Act claim it is a vital tool to fight climate change by putting a price on pollution, which will help Washington's citizens over future generations. Critics note that it drives up the cost of food, fuel, and energy for the current generation. As much of government is a balance between future generations and current generations, please explain where you think the balance should be. And Candidate Kelbon, this is yours first.
Sure, thank you. The Climate Commitment Act has a good goal. I agree with reducing carbon emissions. I'm not convinced that act is actually doing that. We are putting more and more people onto the grid. Whether the grid can handle that load is an entirely different question, but that is the direction we're going. Yet what we are doing is giving our PUDs that generate our electricity a free pass on carbon emissions, literally a free pass, no carbon credits required till 2044, with a bill sponsored by Representative Chapman that would have also extended to private generators of electricity. So I don't know what we're getting, but what we are in the way of carbon emissions from that law. But what we are seeing is a lot of pain, because it amounts to essentially a very regressive tax. People pay it at the pump, certainly, but what you may not realize until you look at it is that translates into everything else we purchase, and we result in the fourth highest grocery cost in the nation. And when I meet retirees whose Social Security is not lasting to the end of the month because they have to buy groceries, that's painful. It's not fair. And it also affects, we had a school levy that failed here the first time in Quilcene with my help, one of many voices that supported it. We got it through the second time. But when you look at what they cited as the cost that it increased to call for it, it was fuel for their buses, it was fuel for heating, it was propane, it was food services. This ripples through to all of the services we have received. So is there a better way to address this? And in my view, as an engineer, I want to see us investing in additional alternative clean energy sources such as hydrogen fuel cell technologies and potentially small modular reactors. And I say that I want to convince myself they're as safe as I read, because I lived through 3 Mile Island back in the day. But I think there are other things we can do technology-wise that will be more productive and actually get us there quicker than what we're doing right now. But what we are doing is making it, again, very difficult for people that are living on the edge financially to keep living here. And I don't think that's fair.
Right, and Candidate Chapman.
Look, I may lose this race, but I'm not going to sit here and be criticized for sponsoring bipartisan legislation to save jobs in the 24th Legislative District. And that's exactly what that legislation would have done. There's a small private they generate electricity in Grays Harbor. And the workers there that I've met with draw from both the 19th and the 24th legislative district. And the Climate Commitment Act basically made their cost of electricity too expensive to be worth. They're also looking at becoming a hydrogen hub because they have a lot of water. They needed the extension of this tax break. It didn't pass. I couldn't convince enough of my legislators, but to sit here and be criticized for a piece of legislation that was bipartisan to help the men and women of this district by somebody who wants to sit in the state Senate is really, I don't, in all my years of campaigning, I've never been criticized for helping the district. Now, when you talk about the Climate Commitment Act, that is also a piece of legislation that directly impacts the jobs in the 24th legislative district. There's a clean diesel plant in Grays Harbor at the Port of Grays Harbor. And again, right on the line of the 24th and the 19th. And the Climate Commitment Act and the low carbon fuel standard piece of legislation that I helped pass kept that plant going, has allowed that plant to expand. Those are $60,000 a year jobs. Many of them are folks from out of the military. And that plant has been so successful that it actually was bought out by one of the oil majors because they're committed to clean carbon and they're committed to clean diesel. And the Climate Commitment Act is not being opposed by big oil in this state. You know who's opposing it? One hedge fund guy. These initiatives for the rollback of the capital gains tax, rollback of the Climate Commitment Act, rollback of long-term care. There's a hedge fund guy coming into Washington State and funding that. I completely oppose all three of those initiatives. As Governor Inslee said at a recent meeting that I was at a hydrogen meeting, Washington goes forward. We don't go backwards on the climate. We are a leader nationally. And when we beat back this initiative, we're going to be the first state in the nation, along with California, to take such a stand on climate change and the impacts of climate change. We are a leader on this issue.
Turning now to the issue of schools. The percent of state funds going to education has decreased over the last few years following the legislative response to the McCleary lawsuit. In 2018, more than 50% of the budget went to education, where now less than 50% of state dollars go to education. How should we work toward increasing education funding, and how much do you think we should increase it? And this starts with candidate Chapman.
Many of us have worked to bring that number back up to 50%. And, you know, this is what's frustrating about politics. That's an easy statistic to kind of trot out. Gosh, we had something between the 2018 or the 2017 McCleary fix and today. It was called a global pandemic. And our budget got a little out of whack. And we're still kind of making the adjustment. This was a short session this last year. I think in this next long session, we're well aware that because of the pandemic and the impacts on the budget and all the machinations that we had to make as a state to come through the pandemic and all the hard work that men and women did in state government and local government, you know, give us a little bit of time to get this back in over 50%. And we're going to do that. The legislature is very aware of it. The next governor, if it's Governor Ferguson, is going to be very aware of that. He's fully aware. But it is easy to kind of, it's like when they talk about we have more people more kids on reduced and free breakfast and lunches than ever before. Yeah, because we lowered the income threshold. More families are eligible, not because more families, you know, families, but we lower, and there's many of us who want to have free meals. Kids should eat when they come to school. So we got more work to do. Probably, we probably need to look at where some new revenue is going to come to continue to fund. Basic education needs to be funded, just like our hospitals need to be funded. Our local governments need to be funded. Our law enforcement needs to be governed. Guess what's going to happen if the initiatives are passed? Capital gains goes away, long-term Climate Commitment Act goes away. You drive a many $billion-dollar hole in our state budget. Where's that money going to come from? And we're going to get this right. But you'll hear lots of criticism on this. But there was a global pandemic, folks. Think about that. And we governed through that. And we fell behind just a tiny little bit.
And candidate Kelvin, your answer, please.
Okay, well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to answer this as an academic, but more importantly, as a mom and a grandmom. I'm a mom of daughters. I'm a grandmother of a granddaughter. I'm going to always go to bat for women and children. And the problem that I just heard is exactly what I'm seeing. We have to find some additional revenue sources for schools. No, we don't. That's our first priority. It is our paramount priority. You fund that fully first. We always hear about new taxes, new revenue sources that are going to go to schools, and they don't. The lottery, when it was passed in 1982, was supposed to fund education, and less than 20% goes towards that. Cannabis legalization was supposed to fund education. Again, less than 20% goes there. You fund it first. And we're doing that well with salaries. We're not doing that with special ed. We're not doing that with schools. We have about a dozen sizably unsafe schools on the peninsula that needs to be changed. So you fund that first, you fund infrastructure, you fund public safety, and then you see what's left for other projects. But these priorities have to be addressed, and they're not. And we're doing a disservice to our kids. Our kids are so behind from the pandemic, from being out of school for years. And in fact, Mike Chapman voted for a bill to reduce the credits for graduation during that time period from 24 credits down to 20. That's wrong. That's lowering the bar. We need to keep the bar high. We've got smart kids. We need to make sure that we're educating them either to go on and succeed in college, not for some, underwater basket weaving that's going to run up debt, but a college that will actually provide a way to make a living or to get them into the skilled trades and provide an appropriate path there as well, which we badly need. And it's a good path forward. So we need to fund our schools. We need to refocus them on the cores. We need to get parents involved rather than trying to keep them out. We need to provide teachers the ability, unfettered ability of administrators to teach, to control their classrooms, to give them the resources so that if kids that need mental health can get the mental health treatment in schools rather than having the teachers fix it. And we also had the need to have teachers and school districts be accountable to provide the results that we're not always seeing.
And continuing on that theme of schools, what role should the state legislature play regarding school boards that choose to practice book censorship and prevent discussions of LGBTQ rights and freedoms? Candidate Kelbon, this is yours first.
Sure. So I'm kind of a bibliophile. I'm the kid that always went and got the maximum of 10 books that you get as a kid, walked them home, read them, and was back within a week doing it. I'm not going to censor books. I'm not going to censor books that people think are wrong on the left. I'm not going to censor books that people think are wrong on the right. Historical books that were accurate at the time they were done, that's a piece of work. You don't mess with that. You do need to make sure that kids are accessing age-appropriate books. I don't think I'm a strong supporter of sex ed, but sex ed is pretty much, here's where babies come from, and here's how you don't get pregnant, and here's how you don't get STDs. That's something we need to teach kids that are of puberty age. It's not something you need to teach kindergartners. I don't know that happens, but that's kind of my overall approach to that. LGBT folks need to be respected. I would support a zero tolerance policy from bullying of other kids or staff. That is not acceptable. And it's something that you need to teach, but I don't think that is the core curriculum. The core curriculum is reading, math, science, civics, history. That's what we should be focusing on. And local school boards do need the ability to make sure that their kids are learning that. That's why we elect our school board members. So again, that's the focus. But part of that is also respect people that are different, love people that are different. And if you don't treat them right, there needs to be consequences. And that goes both for staff and for children. But let's teach them age-appropriate material and make sure that we're actually preparing them to go forward. Because right now we have kids, roughly a third of eighth graders not passing national math standards, and roughly a third of fourth graders not passing national reading standards. That is not fair. We need to do a better service job for our kids. They're our future. And if we can't do that right, I don't know what's more important.
And Candidate Chapman.
First of all, I think that was the right thing to do, was to allow these kids to graduate. The pandemic was no fault of these kids. We didn't lower standards. We gave kids a chance to get on with their life and move on to college instead of having them hang around high school with being a few credits short. And I believe that was a pretty bipartisan bill. But last year, in a short session, we added $335 million of additional funding to our K-12 schools. We added $79 billion to the school construction account, and we added $69 billion for skills centers and career and technical education, and $114 million to our tribal compact schools. To say we're not aware of the issue and fixing our budget, and to say it's not a priority, those are really large numbers in a supplemental budget year. Secondly, we debated well into 2, 3, 4 in the morning, a comprehensive piece of legislation to give our school districts the tools they needed to have age appropriate sex education. I wish we lived in a world where all we needed to teach was how not to get pregnant. But folks, this is a very complicated world. And these kids that are growing up, you talk to any teacher right now, these kids that are growing up, they needed a little more education than that. They needed a little more teaching as to what to do when their uncle is inappropriately touching them. Who should they talk to? We're trying to give these kids the tools to be protected so we don't, and we read about the horrific stories. And as a former law enforcement officer, one of the reasons why I knew I wanted to get out of law enforcement and into public service in a legislative realm was that I knew if I had to investigate one more child molestation, I actually might cross the line and use too much force on the perpetrator. We want our teachers in the school districts, we wanted them to have the tools. And Ms. Calbon's party debated that bill for hours, and not one Republican voted for that bill to give our teachers the skills so we can talk about how moderate we're going to be. But for someone who's going to serve in that caucus, there was no moderation that night. I sat through that debate. I cast that yes vote. I'm proud of that yes vote. Not one Republican voted for that bill to help our kids have the tools to protect themselves in the future.
Turning now to some issues of government ethics. Can you please explain the rules as you understand them regarding elected officials in Washington accepting gifts and vacations from friends? And in this explanation, please note whether you believe we should strengthen our ethics requirements for all elected and appointed officials. Candidate Chapman.
Yeah, you can be assured Washington State has I think, if not the strongest, one of the strongest ethics policies in place. In fact, there's an ethics official for the House of Representatives alone who gives us immense advice. In fact, I just got an email today about election year activities, what we can and can't do, and and we have policies over how many meals we can take. If we take anything over $50, it has to be disclosed on our personal affairs, financial disclosure every year. But our ethics, we've had ethics training, first time ever in my time in the legislature. And ethics goes a long ways. And we obviously have a very strong PDC reporting. I can only take $1,200 from any one entity in the primary election, and then another $1,200 in the general election. We're limited to $2,400, except if you take money from your party caucus. My opponent's taken $80,000 from the Senate Republican caucus. So when she's sitting here talking tonight, she's going to be representing the Senate Republican caucus. We've never seen $80,000 in any legislative race that I know of at all. $80,000. I might take $1,200 from some group that you don't agree with, but $1,200 is the most I can take before the primary, and $1,200 in the general. Folks, I would never take $80,000 from the Senate Campaign Committee. That's buying an election on the peninsula, and that, to me, is unethical. To accept that kind of money, to want to win so bad. I think about 80. I know I'm making a big deal about it. So she will show that she's raised more money than me from one source. And I know they have unlimited funds virtually that they can give her. I expect that she'll end up receiving around $150,000, maybe $200,000 from the Senate Republican Committee. So we can talk about how bipartisan and how neutral we're going to be. They were going to want something.
We're going to have to, your time is up. Candidate Calbon, could you please explain the rules as you understand them regarding receiving gifts and vacations from friends and ethics requirements? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. I think it's easy. You don't accept those kind of things when you're in public office, period. And that's how it should be applied. With respect to accepting money from a party, yeah, we're trying to get some balance back. But I'll tell you that those dollars have been matched almost 2-to-1 by dollars that Mike Chapman has taken in from lobbyists and PACs, special interest. I've not taken a dollar from a special interest or a PAC. And if you should look at the list on the PDC of the interests that have supported Mike Chapman, and if they explain some of his votes that are kind of unusual, and sometimes he takes votes that he doesn't even support, like he voted against capital gains, but says he supports it. Look at some of the funding. I think you're going to see some of these questions. I think you're going to see why he is the only legislature of all the senators and all the representatives that voted against a bill to strengthen penalties for animal cruelty, which I don't know how you justify that. I can make some guesses looking at who testified against the bill. This is unacceptable. So no, not any special interest. Just trying to get some balance back. And I care enough about this race to put my own money into it as well, because I really think we need some balance. One party rule in the House, Senate, and governor's mansion gets us some odd results. The other thing about government ethics is transparency, and I fully support legislative transparency and disclosure of legislative records and communications under the Public Records Act, which most of the legislatures have resisted, including Mike Chapman. He's not taken the oath to say that I will not invoke that executive privilege to keep from disclosing those records.
I did.
It's
yes,
not,
I did.
I'm sorry,
Yes.
I haven't seen you on the list. If you're there, that's great. I didn't see Mike Chapman on a list. If he's there, I apologize. But he should take that oath if he has it, and more legislators should. I have not seen that happen. You can exert an executive privilege to keep from disclosing to the people that hire us, which is the legislatures, what we're doing.
Turning now to another fun and exciting topic, taxes. Knowing that Washington's Constitution prohibits a progressive income tax, and that the property tax, sales tax, and business and occupation tax are extremely regressive, what legislation, including amending the Constitution, would you like to see to create a more fair tax structure that appropriately tax the highest earners in Washington? And that would be for candidate Kelbon first, please.
There we go. So I'm not in favor of an income tax, and I think that's been now settled by an initiative that was filed and then adopted by the legislature. Sales taxes are indeed one of our revenue sources. They do hit people in lower income more, but people in higher income are also buying an awful lot of stuff they probably don't need. So they're paying it as well. Real estate taxes, of course, go across the board. But the third leg, though, of our tax system is B&O tax, and I don't see that as regressive. I see that as something that is tied to business, and we need more business, and that will grow that revenue base, and it grows it in a way that doesn't penalize working people. The B&O tax, if we can get more industry here, is going to raise that source of income and revenue to the state, but more importantly, it's going to raise people's standard of living. With higher wages, it's going to increase their spending, and thus the sales tax, and it leads to prosperity, not a lack of able to maintain daily living. And what we are seeing right now is that very effect from the carbon credits or carbon tax or gas tax, whatever you want to call it, which is essentially amounting to a regressive tax on rural people, particularly those that have to commute long distances to work, to medical care, to food stores. It impacts them at the pump, impacts them at the grocery store, at the hardware store, everything they buy. That is a de facto tax, and it's hitting people in the rural areas very hard. We don't have all the close-in infrastructure, all the close and highly detailed and reliable public transit that people have in urban areas here. So it's not working well for us. And you'll hear a lot about capital gains tax, which is only supposed to hit the wealthy at $250,000 and above. But there's been a push the last couple of years in the legislature to lower that threshold down to $15,000, where it starts simply hurting people that are trying to manage their life savings. It'll hit small businesses that have grown their family-owned business their whole life and are trying to turn it over to somebody or sell it. And it is going to drive revenue out of the state by causing a company like Amazon to follow Jeff Bezos and cost the state $126 billion.
And now candidate Chapman.
Yeah, I don't spend a lot of time worrying about where Jeff Bezos decides to live. I'm not sure that his loss of this state has really moved the needle forward. I will say that his ex-wife has stayed in this state, makes her sales, pays her taxes, and then gives away her wealth. And she's somebody that I deeply respect. And I think if we had more wealthy billionaires take that approach, the world might be a little better place. With regards to our tax structure, certainly 8 years ago when I took office, we had a very regressive tax structure. And since then, there has been a capital gains tax implemented. It's interesting. I've never heard anybody oppose the capital gains unless they themselves were going to have to pay it. And we see a lot of hedge funds in Bellevue that have been upset, and some have left the area. But here's the deal with the capital gains. The first 250,000 of a gain, not that you sold your stock for 250, it's that you bought it for 100,000 and sold it for 350. No tax. It's only above the 250, and I think actually it's been adjusted a little higher for inflation. If you have a $500,000 capital gain, your tax to the state of Washington is $17,500. Let me repeat that. If you have a $500,000 capital gain, the tax to the state is $17,500, which my guess is your accountant can write that off your federal capital gain tax. Even Idaho has a capital gain tax. Where does that money go for? It builds childcare centers. We've seen a new childcare center use that money in Elma, where they desperately needed childcare, especially for their local hospital down there. Montesano, $515,000 for a Montesano childcare center. $773,000 to convert the school district old office buildings that they're no longer using here in Port Angeles for a shore aquatic childcare center. I think people who have a $500,000 gain can pay $17,000 and see that invested in childcare centers around our state and in all districts. Yeah, I voted against it because there were a few things that we needed to adjust, including Ms. Kelbon should know that timber sales are protected. Small business sales are protected. The sale of your house is protected. We're only targeting the paper account. And since then, I think it's working. And these projects are important.
All right, turning to healthcare. Insurance companies sometimes deny paying claims for treatments, even when you're in network. When buying health insurance for your small business or choosing a plan through your employer, consumers in Washington aren't allowed to see the denial rates of each insurance company, even though the Washington office of the Insurance Commission collects the data. Other states like Utah post the insurance claims denial rates on their website. What would you do to improve health insurance transparency so people in Washington can make educated choices when choosing their health insurance? Candidate Chapman.
Well, one of the things we need to do is elect a new insurance commissioner, and I hope that Senator Patty Cooterer is elected our next insurance commissioner. She will take this fight on to the insurance companies. She was all about transparency. She ran a number of bills that came through the legislature this year, including a committee that I serve on. And she's taken the lead on that, and we just have had leaderless. We've had negative leadership in the insurance office for the last few years. An individual that no longer should have been a public service was still running that office. I look forward to the leadership of Senator Cooterer and bringing the legislation forward to bring this transparency forward. Prior to him being elected as our state treasurer, Mike Pelliciotti also led a number of transparency issues on insurance. He led a number of issues, and he came into the legislature when I did. You have some great state leaders. Mike Pelliciotti is the treasurer. That are looking at these issues all the time. Mike Pelliciotti returns, tens of millions of dollars to the taxpayers by some of the work that he's done in refinancing his bonds. So we need good state elected officials. Senator Cooterer will be a great insurance commissioner, and she has my full support. And I think it's as simple as that. I think these are issues that have been languishing because of the current insurance commissioner, and I think that this will be some new elected officials at the statewide level are going to be a good idea. And the legislature, kind of rolls up our sleeves. There's a lot of folks that want to work on this, and I think it's important. I'll give back 30 seconds.
Candidate Kelbon.
Yeah, I have to confess, I'm being a bad voter here. I have not investigated any of the insurance commissioner candidates, but it is the first time that seat's been open for many years. It is important that people do spend the time there, and I'm going to fess up. I haven't done it because I've been focused on this race and other issues. But please do pay attention to that race. Do better than I did there. Full transparency, I would definitely support. That is something we need in all aspects of government. And insurance is one of those things that it's kind of a necessary evil, but it weighs a lot onto the society. Cost-wise, same as credit card companies. I wish we didn't need it, but we do. I would definitely support requiring as much transparency as we can get there so people can make informed choices. And I think we also need to look overall at our insurance rates. We're talking about health insurance, but I hear the same thing with people with their homeowners insurance and their car insurance has all gone up incredibly the last couple of years. And when I talk to insurance brokers on why that is, the primary thing I hear about is inflation, the cost of repairs, whether it's for a house or whether it's for a car, and the cost of medical care. So if we can get that inflation under control, that's obviously a national issue, but again, we've done some things here to increase our cost. And I'm again pointing to the carbon tax, which increases cost across the board. So just realize these touch us in ways we may not initially think of. And I'll also see 30 seconds. Here we go. We're even.
All right. So we've touched on job creation before. What are some new initiatives you would support for bringing high-paying skilled work to the Olympic Peninsula? Candidate Kelbon, you first.
Sure. This is kind of really fun, and the fun is that there's more possibilities than I think any of us could lay out right now. I'm pretty excited to see projects that are tied to our historic roots, whether that's the biochar project in Port Angeles, which we have grant funding, and that's an appropriate use of grant funding. Again, I'm not going to necessarily, we should build great buckets of money there for grants at the state level, but if it's there, I'm going to grab it. And certainly the federal level, we pay into it. We've got to get that back. That is something that's tied to our roots. It's something I have expertise in back from grad school when I studied wood pyrolysis as a chemical engineer. I'm excited to see that tying our historic roots to a new job field that also generates, fairly clean energy potentially. The way it's may work out. Same thing with cross-laminated timber projects being considered in Forks, a wood pellet plant in Hoquiam. Those are great. I also want to see though. Other light manufacturing. We have people that know how to use their hands from the maritime industry or from the timber industry. And it's really, as I see it, it's kind of a job of the state and the counties and the cities to do some matchmaking. Look at the facilities we have. Look at the ports we have. Where can we find uses for those? And what do companies need in order to make them enticed to come in and work with us and use those facilities and fix them up? And it may be that it's tax breaks. It may be that it's finding out that there are some regulations we need to relax. It may be that when you're trying to permit anything to do with the water and you're looking at both national and state regulations and so many people to answer to and so many hoops to jump through that you say, what is the most stringent set? And let's agree that we're just going to follow that and not involve so much duplication of effort and cost to bring those businesses in. So it's thinking creatively, and I personally have a passion for companies that are innovative. That's what I spent my career doing, and I'd like to come up with things that we can do here that we can't be outcompeted, as we're seeing now with McKinley Mill, with folks in Asia. Let's get some new innovation here and grow it.
All right, and Candidate Chapman. Specific initiatives for new jobs.
Yeah, I think we've been doing that. President Obama once said, and he was roundly criticized, and I thought he was right on when he told a group of business folks, you didn't build that business on your own. You had a lot of help from the government. What's the one thing the government? We're in the government. I'm not a small business consultant. I'm not running a small business think tank. I'm not the EDC director. I'm your government representative, and it's my job to make sure that our infrastructure is in a position so that the businesses can come in and build their businesses. That's what we do. That's why it was so important for the West End to see a new Elwha Bridge be rebuilt. It's so important for the Sequim to Blinn corridor to see that safety project. It's so important to see our roundabouts, which, by the way, save you an incredible amount of tax dollars. I don't know that everybody wants a bunch of flyovers over the highway, taking out our viewscape. And when I was a county commissioner, we did not build a flyover by Deer Park Road when we needed to get people out of the theater. We built the underpass. I think everybody, when you drive through there, think of that. Would you have liked to have driven through there and seen an overpass blocking the Olympic Mountain view? And this is what we're known for. But we are investing millions of dollars in our public infrastructure and putting policies in place that keep our manufacturing plants that are here. Now, we cut taxes twice for McKinley Mill. So the tax cuts that we put in place, extending significant tax breaks, still wasn't enough. I haven't given up hope on McKinley reopening, and they had some labor issues, but the low carbon fuel standard that we passed, not a single Republican voted to clean up our diesel fuel while it's being made in Grays Harbor County. Even the 3 Republicans from the other half of the 19th in Grays Harbor voted no on a bill that would help their manufacturing in Grays Harbor for a great product, clean diesel. Like, who's against clean diesel from soybean and used cooking oil? Republicans. Like, knock on wood, that was a great plant. And I hope if Ms. Kilbon is elected, I hope she takes the time to go down there, visit the plant, and pledge her support to support those workers and that product against her party that she's taken so much money from. I don't think she will.
All right, we've got time to squeeze in one more question prior to going to closing statements. Gun control. What is your position on current gun control legislation in Washington? Good enough, more, or less? Candidate Chapman.
Well, we've taken a lead on this issue. It's interesting, when I was a police officer in the 1990s, most law enforcement officers were all for gun control because, quite frankly, we didn't want to run across people who had guns illegally. We didn't want to run across semi-automatic weapons. We didn't want to have to deal with that. It has been saddened to me to see law enforcement become so Second Amendment that they're willing to face people on the street. But we've outlawed assault weapons in this state, and I cast that vote. And I have said publicly many times that I might lose my position. I might lose an election over the assault weapon ban, and we'll find out this fall. I may. But again, I don't want people looking back. I don't want to wake up and hear about a mass shooting in one of our schools or a hospital or a library and look myself in the mirror and say, you know, you didn't take that tough vote. You were too worried to lose your job. No, I don't want this job if that's what it means. We have put the right gun control issues in this place, in this state, and we're a leader. But here's the thing with the Second Amendment. A lot of debate over it. I'm not a constitutional scholar. So I did this. I walked into a gun shop and I said, hey, what's it take for me to buy a ball and musket? The kind of weapon that was on the streets when they wrote the Second Amendment. And he's like, nothing. I'm like, what's the background check? Nothing. I'm like, really? He says, no. I mean, state doesn't regulate ball and musket. So when you talk about losing Second Amendment rights, and you talk about strict constructionism of the Constitution, which so many of my Republican friends do, tell me, where did you lose your Second Amendment right when you look at when they want to look at the Second Amendment from a very strict letter of the law, no wiggle room, the right to keep and bear arms. The arms that were on the street when that Constitution was written, you can still buy today with no restrictions. It's something to think about. I'm proud of the work we've done. Washington's a leader on gun control and gun regulation and reasonable gun regulation to keep our streets safe and our men and women of law enforcement safe, which people never talk about, the weapons they face today.
And Candidate Kelbon.
Thank you. You know, I try to be consistent in all things, and I support people's rights. They may be rights I agree with, they may be rights I enjoy, they may be rights I don't agree with or that I don't enjoy. I go to bat for women, and you know, I'm painted here during these debates as the evil Republican, but I can tell you, I'm going to make sure that women have the ability to make their own reproductive decisions, and that they have the resources to enable those decisions, whether it's support for children, whether it's to make sure that fathers kick in and make sure that adoption and foster care systems work. But I'm not going to ban things. And I'm also not going to ban people's Second Amendment rights. I am a Second Amendment supporter. I am a responsible gun owner. If I have a CPL and if I'm not carrying, which I really do, for me, it's more when there's cougars out at dusk, if anything, my guns are locked up. I support reasonable background checks. What I don't support is this effort to keep demonizing lawful firearm owners. What we ought to be doing is looking at the people that commit the crimes with those firearms. And what I don't understand is how someone like Mr. Chapman, who used to support law enforcement, but I see now bills where he's voting for police to be subjected to independent prosecution by the state if the attorney general or the governor don't agree with the job the sheriff is doing. I see bills he's supported for where people who have committed serious offenses like murder or rape get a mandatory reduction in sentencing if they happen to have been convicted previously as a juvenile. I see bills that give folks a second deferred DUI instead of a first deferred DUI. Why don't we focus on addressing the crimes? And when I hear about the Blake fix for gross misdemeanors for public drug use, and I ask sheriffs and police chiefs whether that's working, I'm told it's not. They need a felony to get people to go into treatment instead of jail. And I say, why not? Is that because they don't want to lose their voting rights with a felony? No, they don't want to lose their gun rights with a felony. These are people that shouldn't be carrying. So we need to really strengthen our mental illness treatment and our addiction treatment to keep us safe. And that's the way to address crime and unsafe people not having guns.
Well, candidates, thank you so much for taking time here to get into some very meaty, detailed policy debates. Again, the community asks some great questions, and I want to thank everybody who sent in questions because you really made this forum tonight. Candidates, it's now time for your closing statements, which will be in the opposite order from your opening statements. This means that candidate Kelbon, you get to go first in your 2-minute closing statement.
Great, thank you. I love living here in the peninsula. Like I said, I've been here for 4 decades. It's been really good to me. My children are doing fine because they have I'll call myself a sugar mama. I help them out financially to get started, to get into housing. Not everybody has that. And I don't want to be an area that is just wealthy old people. That's not going to work. I ran for county commissioner in Jefferson County 2 years ago. I talked to a reporter the first time I'd ever done that, explained my concerns about housing and jobs, and then made a joke at the end that I didn't want to see us be the villages in Florida. And that was the only part that made the paper, of course. But here I am 2 years later, and I see last week that Port Townsend is the second oldest community in the United States, behind only the villages. So we're heading there. And Port Angeles was on that list pretty high up, as was Aberdeen. I still don't understand why Sequim is not there. And we really need to fight this with enabling young people to live here. Housing, real industry with living wage jobs, not just retail, and addressing some of the taxes that are really regressive and hitting working people. That is my goal, to make us a diverse community of all ages that can prosper as we've had before. I'm going to work everything I have to get that. I have a unique skill set. We've never had somebody with this mix of technical, legal, and business, and a new set of eyes that I think can course correct us a bit here to get us on a better path. We're doing a lot of things right, but we're doing a lot of things that we could do far better to keep this an area that is as prosperous as it's always been. I would welcome anybody that has a question. You can call me, go to electmarshakelbon.com. Or call me and send me a text. My information's all on that website, and I would appreciate your support and your vote come August and again in November. Thank you.
And now, candidate Chapman.
Yeah, thanks for hosting this debate. I have voted to defend a woman's right to choose, and I always will. And I'm going to make that as definitive as possible, because we just heard a little bit of wiggle room. My opponent's party opposes a woman's right to choose. With the specter of the Trump administration on the horizon, the attack on women will be legend if he has a second term. And in the first term of the Trump administration, Washington stood strong to defend the woman's right to choose, full stop, from the governor to the attorney general to the legislature, the Democratic majority in the legislature. Not a single Republican ever helped us on defending women's right to choose. Folks, don't be dissuaded by this "I'm for everybody's rights." Trust me. You cannot trust the legislation that is going to be introduced in Olympia should there be a majority of Republicans in the Senate or the House. And you cannot trust President Trump when he says, oh, well, this is a full stop moment. And this election is about one thing and maybe a second. It is defending women's rights, which I have a 100% record, and I'm proud of that. And it is about protecting our democracy. Washington is a bulwark against the attacks on our democracy, and the men and women who run our elections do a great job, and we have secure. And this nonsense about, oh, I'll support the results if they're free and fair. No, folks. Should I lose? I will concede. Full stop. I so trust our system. But you won't hear that from my opponent. You won't hear her stand up and say, I will vote against my party to defend women. She won't stand up to her party on this attack on democracy. That's what this election is about. And that's why I'm asking you to return me to Olympia as your next state senator. And I ask you for your vote. Thank you very much for taking the time tonight. I think you're on mute.
I am muted, aren't I? It happens. Thank you, everyone, for listening to this focused policy discussion tonight. And thank you, candidates, for your thoughtful answers. These candidates have taken the bold step of running, and now it's our turn to do the voting. If you are not yet registered to vote, we encourage you to go to votewa.gov and get yourself registered, either online or by mail through July 29th or in person at your county courthouse until August 6th. If you're not sure about your voter registration status, you can check it on the votewa.gov website. Ballots will be mailed out next week and can be mailed in or placed in one of the many drop boxes throughout the county. Election day is August 6th, so please be sure to fill out your ballot and get it either in the mail or in a drop box. I'm asking everyone to vote. Then talk to everyone you know and make sure they have a plan to get their ballot in. This forum has been recorded, and a link to it will be posted both on the website for the League of Women Voters Clallam County and the League of Women Voters Jefferson County in a few days. Once we have posted it, be sure to spread the word among your friends who are unable to join us live so that everyone can be an informed voter. It is now 8:11 and time for our forum to end. For those of you listening on KPTZ 91.9 FM, Port Townsend's Community Radio, it's time to return to your next scheduled program. Everyone have a wonderful evening. Remember, August 6th, primary elections. Please vote.